Hel- Hello and welcome back to LTC Heroes Live by Experience Care. I am in Louisville, Kentucky at the Kentucky Healthcare Association, and I'm excited to be talking to Scott Gibson. He's the administrator at Essex Nursing and Rehabilitation. Scott, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Scott, I'm excited to talk to you. It's my first time at the association. I usually dive right in and ask, what's your initiation story? But I want to ask, who's the first person that you wanted to run up to and give a hug when you ran into your Kentucky peers?
Honestly, it was a former coworker that's not actually in the industry per se. She's part of the QIO. It's Angelita, former coworker of mine. We have been talking in the recent past. I was actually on a podcast for them not too long ago. So this is kind of an interesting circle here
You're on
to
the
be on
circuit.
another. Yeah. But yeah, just to see her and because we have talked, but we haven't seen each other in
nice.
person in a while. So
That
it was
is
good
cool.
to see her.
So let's dive in, Scott. I told you before we hit record, I love doing these interviews because I think one of the ways to help combat staffing is to highlight specific leaders and why they fall in love with long-term care, because that's contagious.
Right.
So let's dive in. When do you first remember getting your feet wet in long-term care? Your first job, the first day you worked? How did you get into this world?
To try to make a long story short, I actually started at the QIO doing press releases, public relations. The QIO is the Quality Improvement Organization. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware of that. When contracts changed every 3 years, then the job changed. And when my job went away, they said, we want to keep you on. How about you help work with physician practices and nursing homes? And so I did just that. I signed them up. We looked at electronic health records, things like that. And when that contract ended, we didn't really work with physician practices anymore. We worked with nursing homes pretty exclusively. So I continued that work, looked at falls and things like that. And finally, when that contract ended, we lost the contract. We didn't have the contract for the state in that with that company. So I sent out sort of a farewell email and just said, hey, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. Here's your new contact information, and left it at that. I got a couple phone calls and said, have you ever thought about being an administrator? And I said, sure, maybe, possibly, not really. Got an interview, got the job, went in. The first day, was terrified. This was almost 4 years ago.
Why were you terrified?
Because I knew the industry, but I had not worked in the building. And I knew that there were some expectations of knowledge. You know, I walked in not licensed my very first day. It was more of an AIT training than it was being an administrator. I learned a lot, not just that first day, but in that first job, working with the different departments and getting to know the people, the employees and the residents, and just their stories. And kind of learned a little bit about myself too.
Is it fair to say that, you know, the first way you got in was almost much more analytical, and then when you got in as an administrator, it was much more human, much more relational?
Absolutely. I'd say probably the first day I walked in thinking, I have all these great tools and resources that I've used over the past 15 years. I'm going to come in and I'm going to change everything for the better. And it wasn't exactly that. And I don't know that it ever has been exactly that. We're all a lot more complex than just data. You still want to be data driven, but you also want to know the people behind all of that. It's more than just falls and pressure ulcers and all of that. There's a human story there.
I know you're young, so I'm not going to say that you don't have
Thank you for that.
An option to do 2 or 3 more careers, but I feel like you might be a lifer in long-term care. Do you think that you'll retire in long-term care?
I do.
Right.
And I hope that Medicare allows me to. We always have regulation changes and things. I love what I do. I like the people I'm working with. And I hope that we aren't regulated out of a job.
That is the reason I ask, is because I want to know, you were scared to death your first week. At what point did you realize, okay, I have the analytical skill set. I'm learning the intangibles, the social, the life skills. I think I might be here for life. Do you remember a moment where you're like, I'm okay at this and it's rewarding for me?
Yeah, honestly, I want to say it was right as the COVID outbreak hit, because that was right about my starting period. Just after that, when we all came together as a group to figure out this problem that nobody in our generation or even the generation previous had really experienced. Um, I had people looking up to me at that time, even though I didn't know if I had all the answers or not. Um, and when I didn't have the answers, again, we came together as that team and really proved that we can problem solve. We can figure this out together.
I find, Scott, I find that most professions change you in some way or another when you leave the job. I find that in long-term care, that division between home and work uh, is even more diminished because of the way that it changes our outlook in life, our philosophy. I'm wondering, you can tell me this from a generic point of view, or maybe from being a leader during COVID. How has long-term care changed the way that you approach the world, your life, your community, your family?
I try to be calm. I try to, and maybe this does come back to the QIO days, be more analytical, and see kind of the whole picture. Um, there's a lot going on in long-term care. We have a lot of problems to solve, and so sometimes taking that collected step backwards and trying to see the holistic. Um, I think that's kind of helped me in my personal life as well. I'm raising two daughters right now with my wife, and as the youngest or the oldest, excuse me, is stepping into her teenage years, we're kind of having to take a step back and not be that brusque, abrupt, emotional. We don't want to match her emotions. We want to step back and say, hey, let's look at this whole thing. You're going through stuff. How can we help you? Instead of saying you're grounded, go to your room, all of that. So I think that's kind of helped me in that capacity.
That leads me into kind of a question I often ask at the end of the interview, which is, if a young 15-year-old or an 18-year-old was in your neighborhood and they said, Scott, I see you work on weekends. I see you work on holidays, but you always have a smile on your face. I'm thinking about going to long-term care. What advice would you give that young teenager?
I would first of all say try it out. What are your passions? It's People think about long term care and they think of the nursing aspect of it. If they want to be a CNA, into a nurse, into a leader, great, go for that. If you're more of a creative and you want to be into activities, we have that option as well. There, we always think of that nursing aspect, but there's so much more in long term care. And there's even, as far as corporations, you don't have to be directly involved in that day-to-day care. You can move up the ladder as well. So the options are there, just depending on what that person is passionate about.
I like how you said, give it a try. I'm a father of a 6-year-old, and later in life, and my wife is almost 50 with the 6-year-old, and friends often say, "Hey, should I have a kid?" And I say, "Don't try it." I say, "Why don't you go volunteer in a nursing home?"
Hmm.
Because that's where you're going to learn to see if you have it in your heart right now where you are in life, and volunteer, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for 8 weeks in a row.
Right.
And if you can make something bigger than you consistently for 8 weeks in a row, you might be able to have a kid. Now,
Yeah.
wait till it's 7 days in a row.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Start with a puppy maybe, and then see if you can keep that thing alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always a challenge. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
In terms of, I guess, intangibles would probably be the word that I want to say. What are the intangibles that you think make a good long-term care leader? What are the social skills or the life skills? And then, just so you know, I'm going to go into frontline caregivers.
Okay. Well, honestly, it's compassion, the ability to listen, the ability to empathize. We're all going through something. Problem solving skills, honestly.
Mm.
Uh, I was actually talking to somebody earlier today about falls. We've sadly had several falls in the past few weeks, more than our normal, and it's just figuring out what's going on. Some of our folks can't express what's happening to them. Is it a pain? Is it a confusion? Is it hunger? They're getting up and trying to find food. Do they need to go to the restroom? What's going on that they can't tell us about that we can perhaps figure out through a medication or a service that we're not providing, anything like that. So I think that being able to problem solve, and again, that compassion, that drive to problem solve that issue.
And would you say that's the same for the frontline caregiver, or would you add an extra attribute to that?
Certainly, I think it is true for that frontline caregiver. I mean, you have to have compassion in order to do some of the things that we do in nursing care. Absolutely. I don't know, just off the top of my head, if I have anything to add to that for frontline.
If you took those attributes that you said and you turn it into a job listing and you're looking for this person, I'm guessing you have someone in your mind. There's some CNA or someone in the kitchen or someone in maintenance who fits that to a T. Who is that person in your organization? You're like, man, this person teaches me every single day and this person fits it perfectly.
Oh goodness. I don't know if I want to name a name because then I'll feel like I've left people out.
You can blame that. I asked for one or two.
Right, you asked for one or two.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you did say maintenance, because our maintenance director at this point is actually a CNA. That's where he started as a CNA in our building 25 years ago, I think, 26 years ago, something like that. And so he has that knowledge, that ability to kind of see things that, again, he's not front line right now. He's doing maintenance, but he can kind of see that and has that knowledge. We have Bianca Clark, who is one of our CNAs. She, and I don't want to get too personal here, but she's had some struggles personally in her life in the last 6 months or so. She comes to work with a smile on her face every day. When we need her to work an extra shift, if she's able to, she does it. I can't say that she's doing it not begrudgingly sometimes, maybe, but she does step up. She helps out. She brings in her rainy day shoes and gives showers if she needs to. All of that, she'll step in and do what's needed to be done. And definitely want to give her the recognition for that.
Scott, I want to ask you to put on your humble hat, and just so the listeners, or even your teammates, your peers, your family listen. The reason why is because I'm convinced that younger generation want to work behind amazing people. And if long-term care, we're so humble, we never share what we do well, we're not going to be able to trek the young and brightest. They're going to go work in a retail store.
Right.
What's something you've done in the last year or two that you're extremely proud of? And it could be you hired the right person. It could be that you changed your leadership style. Anything that stands out, like, I'm just really proud about this.
One thing that really sticks out as you asked me that is we had a resident who had a form of dementia, and his wife was actually in another facility, and the children decided not to put them in the same facility because they just weren't getting along, and they were afraid that there could be some conflicts there. On the surface, he was a very respectful gentleman. I didn't know much about him except that he was in our facility and needed some short-term care. It turns out that he had kind of diminished after he came in. He lost the ability to walk, and his memory just worsened very abruptly. When we moved him to our memory care unit, I spent a little bit more time there in the COVID era and got to know him, asked him some questions. And of course, when you're dealing with somebody in dementia, they don't sometimes know the when or the where. And so he would often talk about his store. And so, finally I had some time to sit down with him and just, tell me about your store. Tell me about what you do there, what you sell there. He owned a hobby store. Focused mostly on toy trains, model trains. And talking to his son, So, said he keeps talking about the store and the trains and all that. And he said, "Oh yeah, he used to own the store. He sold it years ago, but we have a basement full of stuff that I don't know what I'm going to do with when he passes." So I came up with this idea. I said, "Could you put a box together of, even if nothing works, just of some of the trains, some of the track, a couple of the little switches, whatever." And he put it all together. Came in a little Amazon box that he brought over, and we sat it down, and the demeanor, the light behind his eye, all of this changed. And he became a completely different person. I mean, he de-aged probably 20, 25 years and became a hobbyist again. This was his main focus. Where we had days where we would just give him a blank piece of paper and say, "Hey, run the numbers on us for today. We got to look at the budget and all of this." And he was in that mindset. A lot of the time thinking that he was running the store at the nursing home. But when he saw those trains, I mean, he became that hobbyist again, and it just lit up my eyes and kind of teared me up a little bit, and I think it brought some joy to some other folks as well.
That's a beautiful story. That's exactly what I was looking for, because I feel like that if a high schooler is like, I'm gonna go wash cars this summer and make $20, or I'm gonna go work in long-term care, they want to work with someone who's gonna make a difference like that. First, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that story.
Well, thank you.
Scott, I kind of want to move into optimism of the future. I would say generally when we come to conventions, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of regulation talk. There's a lot of survey talk. There's a lot of tag talk. How do you stay optimistic about the future of long-term care, if you do?
Well, I do. I think I do. I did mention earlier regulations and kind of being regulated out of the job, but honestly, you kind of have to stay optimistic, or it will become that negative atmosphere all the time. I think we've got a bright future. We do have some things in the industry that may need to change. I don't want to sound like a radical here or anything, but pay scales and corporate structure, things like that may need to be looked at. I had a conversation with some coworkers not too long ago that, as we looked at presidential election a few years ago, and we're looking at the midterms just recently, national minimum wage has not changed. But if you go out in the real world, you can't find a $7.25 an hour wage. The true minimum wage has gone up, whether the government said so or not. So within the industry, we're looking at what are we getting reimbursed by Medicare, insurance, Medicaid, all of that. How can we kind of refocus that to say, okay, our frontline workers are really the heart and soul. In the QIO, I used to say, you guys are the thankless employees here. You're running the business. I'm kind of making sure the lights stay on, but you guys are taking care of these residents. So looking at that, if we can kind of make those changes, I think I see a little more optimism. But we've got some kind, compassionate people that are in our building, and I know are in other buildings as well. I think this newest generation, I don't want to generalize different generations, but I think this next generation that's coming up has some compassion, has that positive energy, the ability to change. And again, I don't want to sound radical. I don't think we need some revolt, but a good hard look in the mirror at this industry and say, what do we prioritize? I think if we can do that, and we can keep Medicare, CMS focused on, let's take care of the resident, then yeah, I think we've got a good future.
Given your background in, coming more from an analytical point of view, I'm wondering if you have any unique metrics in the way that you look at care, that maybe a metric the government doesn't care about, or maybe a metric ownership doesn't care about, but you do. And I'll just give you an example to inspire you. Like, one of the metrics that I consider, if the podcast is growing, is if guests later refer friends to the podcast as future guests. I'm like, oh, well, then they must have enjoyed the conversation. They think that it was beneficial, and they're going to introduce me to a friend. Do you have any unique metrics that you might not follow on a scorecard, but you're like, this is important to me, and it kind of gives me a pulse?
I don't know. That might be one I have to think about a little bit. I mean, again, the people behind the scenes, or maybe even in front line, right there in the scenes. Um, yeah, I don't know. If you've got employees who are happy to work for you, I mean, it's the first kind of thing that's
Kind of a
popping in my head.
retention,
Yeah,
maybe?
the retention. Yeah. Um, in our building, and of course, I've only been there for a couple of years in this particular building, so I can't take any credit whatsoever. But I think we're doing a great job. We have some employees who have been there for 30 years. As I said, our maintenance director has been there for, I think, 25. My administrator has been there about 25, director of nursing as well. We have our assistant director of nursing, who I think when she leaves, the whole building's just going to collapse. She's really the heart and soul of that building. Um, so I think it's the people. Are they happy? Are they sticking around? I think that's probably maybe one of the best metrics.
I agree. I have an internal metric on my team for retainment, and it's what makes me most proud. Scott, as we start to wrap up, and thank you so much for your time. It's great
Absolutely.
to meet you and be here at Kentucky with you and your peers. I want to ask you about your organization, about Essex Nursing. Uh, Tell me what's unique about it, why you're proud to work there, and if there were someone watching this, why you would say, "Hey, come work with our culture."
Right. Well, we are in South Louisville, and I think it's sort of a forgotten market. Everybody wants to be in Louisville. You want to be in the East End. You want to be out in maybe even out of Jefferson County into one of the surrounding counties out on the East End. We've got a lot of folks. We're family driven. As I said, the folks that we've got in the building who have been there 25, 30 years. We've got a really strong team, a very knowledgeable team, and I think we like to have fun. It's maybe not evident every single day, but in activities, our admissions director, honestly, Tracy, she is, some mornings we want to go, Tracy, just calm it down a little bit. She's kind of in your face fun, which is never a bad thing, truly. Um, so I think she's very motivating as well. So yeah, I think we've got a great team, and I can't brag on them more.
I think it's a good pitch, and
Yeah.
Tracy. Hopefully, everyone will have a Tracy in our organization one time, because it sounds like a fun person to be around. Scott, thank you so much for joining me on LTC
Absolutely,
Heroes.
yeah.
It was a pleasure, and hopefully, I'll see you at another event soon.
Okay, well, thank you very much.